After the riots comes the crackdown. Last week, Britain was shaken by the horrendous murders of 3 young girls at a dance class in Southport in the northwest of England. Then, following misinformation spreading online, falsely claiming that the suspect was a Muslim asylum seeker, riots broke out in Southport before spreading across the country. Mobs have pelted mosques with bricks and even tried to burn down hotels housing migrants. In turn, groups of masked Muslims have since roamed the streets or clashed with protesters in Bolton, Stoke and Birmingham. Now, Sir Keir Starmer has vowed to get tough, but not just on those who committed despicable violence following the Southport killings. No, the violent racism of the few is rapidly becoming a pretext for constraining the freedoms of the many. As well as coming down hard on the rioters, Starmer seems intent on coming down hard on all citizens' civil liberties. Meanwhile, he seems remarkably less bothered by the Islamist intimidation that we now see flaring up in response to the hard right.
But I think, apologies for the language you're hearing, but a sense of the anger, I think you can hear there.
We need to leave you there.
In 2 Downing Street press conferences last week, the new Labour Prime Minister unveiled a suite of proposals supposedly to try to quell the rioting. He vowed to impose criminal behaviour orders on certain agitators. He said he would roll out facial recognition software to help track people's movements. Most striking of all, he condemned the supposedly malign influence of large social media firms and those who run them, and demanded that big tech get a firmer grip on the posting of misinformation. Starmer also warned that there would be consequences for those who whip up disorder by spreading rumours or speculation online. The Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, went further on BBC Radio 4's Today programme. She declared social media firms to be responsible for both the shocking misinformation that has escalated the riots, as well as the deliberate organisation of violence on these platforms. Now, it is entirely possible to loathe the actions of these rioters, while also being alarmed by the government's response and its implications for free speech. Any crackdown on so-called misinformation, or even on the so-called whipping up of hatred, is not going to be confined to those who are directly participating in or inciting violence. It will inevitably be wielded against dissent more broadly, because that is what always happens. Just look at the McCarthyite climate that's raging at the moment. There are demands to have Nigel Farage either arrested or booted out of Parliament in the wake of the riots. The Reform UK leader released a somewhat ill-advised video last week suggesting that the authorities might have been withholding information from the public about the Southport suspect. Now, the police had been withholding information at the time, but largely because the suspect is only 17 years old.
He arrived at court with huge security around him.
A judge later overturned those restrictions to stop all the speculation online about his possible identity and motives. Farage did not repeat the false claim about the suspect being a Muslim asylum seeker. We now know that the alleged killer was born in Britain to Rwandan parents and has no known links to Islam. Nevertheless, #Farage riots and #arrest Farage have trended for much of the past week. LBC's James O'Brien has accused Farage of directly inciting the riots.
It's a bit of a Pandora's box, isn't it? What do you mean you want your country back?
Another prominent commentator has called for Parliament to take urgent action against extremist MPs who have fanned the flames of far-right hatred and violence. It's a thinly veiled demand to have Farage and his colleagues in Reform expelled from the House of Commons. For his part, 4-time failed Labour candidate Paul Mason has called for broadcasters and social media platforms to be shut down. There needs to be immediate action against any platform whose algorithm is promoting incendiary content and disinformation, he says. Ofcom must revoke the licence of GB News as well, adds Mason. Apparently, the way to fight fascism and to save democracy is to shut down media outlets that are critical of the government and crack down hard on free speech on the internet. Who's going to tell him? Mason is not alone. When Elon Musk chimed in on X to say that civil war is now inevitable in Britain, a journalist for the New European accused Musk and his platform of fanning the flames, there's that cliche again, of the UK's civil unrest. Guy Verhofstadt, a leading member of the European Parliament, has similarly proclaimed that Musk's comments show the need for a deep examination of the role of social media in the proliferation of political extremism. Many want X, which is the only big social media platform that even tries to uphold free speech, to be brought to heel. Suspended Labour MP Zara Sultana has blamed the riots on the old bête noire of British liberals and leftists, the Daily Mail, claiming that the right-wing tabloids' headlines have, you guessed it, fanned the flames of hate. They really need another metaphor. Apparently the Mail, whose audience is largely middle-aged, Middle England and female, is the chief instigator of violent disorder in northern towns. Sultana is also among those demanding a tougher government response to so-called Islamophobia. The ruling Labour Party has previously signalled its support for an anti-Islamophobia law. Labour has embraced a controversial definition of Islamophobia recommended by the All-Party Parliamentary Group on British Muslims. In 2019, Labour adopted the definition for internal party matters and promised, in principle and in solidarity, to embed it into law should Labour return to power. To be clear, such a law would make it illegal not just to express despicable bigotry towards Muslims, which is already a crime under the UK's race hate laws. It could also criminalise criticism of Islam and even criticism of Islamism, opinions that are totally legitimate. This would be an Islamic blasphemy law in all but name, and a gift to Islamist extremists. As the elite response to the rioting shows, it's unlikely to be only fascists and racists who will be hit by this censorious crusade. Populist politicians, right-leaning journalists, and those with widely held political views could soon find themselves being lumped in with rioters and extremists. In the wake of the Southport atrocity, campaign group Hope Not Hate warned that far-right narratives are being normalised in the UK. The main example it gives of a far-right narrative? That multiculturalism isn't working. An entirely mainstream, common-sense view. In fact, according to Hope Not Hate's own polling, this opinion is shared by around 52% of the population. The grim irony here is that any crackdown on free expression, online or off, through state sanction or cancellation, risks galvanising the very forces that Starmer and co claim they want to contain. If concerns about immigration, multiculturalism and sectarianism are banished from accessible media and major platforms, they will not simply disappear.
Multiculturalism has failed.
Instead, they will find expression only on the fringes. No one benefits more from the ever-expanding definition of the far right and the censorship that always comes with it than the far right itself. The censoriousness of the establishment is a gift to those grifters who claim to speak truth to power and pose as the silenced voice of the majority. Violence, rioting and vandalism must be punished. Speech, on the other hand, must be protected from clampdowns at all costs, even the most extreme, hateful speech. Censorship will only make martyrs out of bigots while curtailing all of our rights. Free speech isn't the problem here. In fact, it's a big part of the solution. It is our only way to thrash out the issues that confront us, to expose the failings of the establishment and the nonsense of the hard right. These riots have done enough damage to our nation. We can't let them be used to trash our precious liberties too.